Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Great, so thanks for coming. I imagine there's other people joining in via remote. My name is John Sangiovanni with MSR's External Research and Programs team, and we're actually very fortunate today to have Saul Griffith with us. Dan Rosenfeld and I met Saul at this year's Emerging Technologies Conference, and were impressed by both the breadth and the depth of his interest and expertise, and he's working on a wide array of different projects. Saul recently completed his PhD at the MIT Media Lab, and he'll talk a little bit about that work, but also talk about some of the things that are happening now in a venture, Squid Labs, that he and a team is working with. So we're very fortunate to have Saul with us. We should have a pretty unstructured hour and a half, so I'm sure Saul will be accepting some questions, and also is very open to floating off topic as appropriate to the questions. So without any more delay, I'll introduce Saul.
All right. Thanks very much, John. Thanks, John and Dan, for hosting me. As John has said, I'm a little ADD in terms of the breadth of things I talk about. It's a small group, so I'm going to encourage this to be fairly informal. Ask me questions at any point. I have support slides around a lot of the materials, so I can switch in and out if people want to go into detail on any particular topic. And the talk is really going to be about sort of things I've done on my summer holidays, where summer holidays was the last 6 years. And most of that you'll start to realize is I've done a lot of work in hardware, where thinking about hardware and the physical universe as a computational medium, or as a structure, and the relationship between information and structure in the physical universe is the sort of one theme that carries through all of this stuff. Briefly on the cover slide, Squid Labs is a company I've just started with a bunch of MIT PhDs and Stanford guys and a Brown guy in Emeryville, California, and we work on sort of early stage development. We don't intend to ever manufacture anything ourselves. We sort of get it through to manufacturable in partnership with other people. And those things range from this machine, which is a machine that can mold any prescription lens, in fact any lens surface, from a single membrane-based minimal energy surface. This is a demo of our electronic rope product, which is a self-sensing rope. I'll talk a bit more about that later. And we also do some digital-based stuff. One is literally in the next month or so, we're actually going to publicly release a software platform for enabling people to do open source hardware, where open source hardware means how do hobbyists share all of their skills in a meaningful way. I'll talk a little bit about that. And then also we do a lot of 3D localization type stuff. So how do you drop 1,000 parachutes out of the back of an airplane, have all of those parachutes land within 10 feet of each other, where all of those 10 feet are in different places. So sort of programming swarms, and that has led to another sort of augmented reality product that I'll talk about. The other thing I do is write cartoons. So this is my PhD at MIT in one page. These cartoons are how-toons. These will be books next year. This is sort of a subversive engineering science curriculum for children, where you learn how to do something by actually building it. This one is a little bit is a little more sciencey than most how-toons, but this sort of describes my thesis pretty well. So this is the main character, Tucker. He looks into his cereal bowl. He notices that the surface energy is bringing all these Cheerios together, but then he realizes, how do I add more structure to this? So this is a direct analogy to my PhD thesis. I was looking at the self-assembly community. This is the idea of how do you make lots of little parts come together to assemble complex structure. And I started to look at that as an information problem. So Tucker realizes that, I can program them to go together if they're like materials, hydrophobic or hydrophilic, and program them to move apart if they're unlike. So if I encode the parts of self-assembly, then I can start to make structure. And then he imagines, how do I get to building something truly complex such as this? So that's what I thought about at MIT for a long time. This slide I've stolen from Neil Gershenfeld, who was sort of a pseudo-advisor I had at MIT. And I think this sort of gives context to this. So 1948, Shannon described how you have perfect communication in noisy channels, and that sort of led to a huge number of pretty important things, right down to the wireless we all enjoy today. 1951, von Neumann, prior to, earlier than reliable transistors where you could have a billion things all working every time on a chip. How do you do computation where you have imperfect components? And he defined all the nice threshold theorems of how you can get perfect computation from imperfect components. And so no one's quite done it here yet. I think I'm sort of trying to push in the direction of supporting the people who will be the person who sometime in the near future shows that by adding computation and logic to an assembly process, you can make perfect manufacture. So defect-free components. Just quick throwaway slide. The other community that is looking at this, and I'd encourage anyone who thinks about biology as computation, and I think this will be a more important trend in the future, is to have a look at Drew Endy and Tom Knight's work at MIT. They are the sort of people who build ring oscillators using proteins, and NOR gates similarly using proteins. They're basically creating an open source repository of little pieces of biological code that you can hopefully in the future string together to make larger programs so that you can truly use biology as a computational medium to do pretty rich sensing type applications. I wasn't thinking about biology, however. I was thinking I want to do all of this inorganically. And so half of my thesis was on self-replicating machinery. On the left-hand video you see here, these are 5-state mechanical state machines. So each of literally the physical operation of the little arms and latches here defines the state. So in the neutral state, they don't bind at all. You can notice if I flip one of the levers, I can change the state so they bind together. Once I have an input string, which is a binary string, by using recognition, white binds white, blue binds blue, you can see from 1 you get 2, and from 2 you get 3, and onwards. So that's doing it by hand. On the right, this is not a computer simulation. This is actually real hardware. This is an air hockey table, literally. These components are about 50 millimeters square. Those components are running exactly the same state machine that you see here. I've got video tracking, so the green, green, yellow, yellow, green, mark number 1, that was the first string that I put in. And then literally using the same state machine logic you've seen on the left. From 1 we have 2. Those things will keep spinning. From 2 we'll get 3. From 2 you get 4. 4 you get 8. And you can actually start to analyze the kinetics of this as an assembly system that has chemical kinetics. So literally exponential manufacture. You start with a bin of 2 types of parts. You throw in a string of those 2 types, and you get exponentially, you make copies of that input string. So we'll let it go for a little longer. Time scale here is pretty slow because these parts are very large. So this is about an hour for this video. And the turbulence that makes these things run randomly, I've just got air jets coming in from the side that gives you the turbulence. So there you get 2, you get 3, and you'll notice that the 4th one forms very soon after that. So look in an important technical publication near you in the next couple of weeks for this one. And there you go everything starts to get really fast from here. But I think in this particular experiment we stopped. We managed to make up to 10 replicants. You pretty quickly consume the reactants if you want to look at it in a chemical sense. So why would you want to make bit strings was the next question, because what I was really interested in is how do you make complex 3D structure. So this is going to be a 2D analogy. So literally this is a sequence of tiles like this bit string that we previously coded, but each tile has state defined in terms of the magnetic interactions of the fold around the vertex. So if it's green, white, folds left. If it's white, blue, folds right. And literally with 4 types of tile, you can show that you can, without self-intersection, you can fold any arbitrary 2-dimensional structure with 4 tile types. Now the neat thing, I'm not quite sure why, but it turns out that if you go to 3D, you can fold any arbitrary 3D structure of any size with a binary sequence, meaning you only need 2 tile types. And you can encode those edges with either a north-south magnetic interaction or a plus-minus charge interaction. So for example, the 3D dog you see up here on the right is folded from 108 right-angled tetrahedrons. This is if you do the you draw the tree structure that defines that. That's what it looks like, and that's actually the binary sequence that folds that structure. So this relates to space-filling curves, Peano, Hilbert, space-filling curve type work. This is sort of the one slide that will help you understand why this works. You can imagine, so each one of these cubes is a voxel. If you divide each voxel into 8 subvoxels, you can draw a Hamiltonian path that will allow you to visit every point in that voxel. I can now show you that if I put the initial voxel with 6 other voxels on each face, I can make by literally just cutting the path and joining, I can now make a single complete loop that visits every point in that larger structure. And so literally by addition, I can build up any 3D object composed of voxels by adding another cube here, another cube here, literally by snipping the loop, joining to the next loop. So that's a lot. You probably need to sit and stare at this for about 3 years, at least I need to, so I don't intend for you to have a purely intuitive understanding immediately, but maybe this will tell the story. Turns out you can do this more efficiently instead of using a cube, but using a rhombic hexahedron composed of 6 right-angled tetrahedron. That might not mean a lot. But literally, if just say I want to build a 3D dog, these are all the loops that visit the 6 points of a rhombic hexahedron. And if then you cut and join all of those loops, that is the dog. So it's got 4 legs, it's got a nice snout, 2 ears and a tail. Literally that is a continuous loop. You can now start at any point in that loop. You can define a right-handed or a left-handed fold about every edge, and that dog will fold from a single string. So sort of in combination, that work is like pre-DNA life. So if you think about polymerase as a Turing machine, which it's, does a hell of a lot of computation in recognizing the nucleic acids and resequencing, where instead so biological life as we know it right now built this Turing machine polymerase out of the components, and then it enables in the replication. But in this case, we're sort of doing, instead of adding the logic to the polymerase, we add 5 states to the individual nucleotides. So if each nucleotide, so that relates to the replication work, if each nucleotide has 5 states, it can do sort of self or autonomous replication. And then if you add a single further state to define how it will fold subsequently, so with 6 states, you can do arbitrary replication and 3D structure. So this is a highly academic pursuit. This, to me, it may be an interesting way, probably 10 or 15 years down the line, to think about building complex 3D MEMS, where you write out your sequence, you spit it out a syringe, it folds, you have 3D structure. So at the same time I was doing that, I was spending a lot of time in the Media Lab. Some of you may have visited there. We had one of every rapid prototyping tool, 3D printers, laser cutters, you've probably all seen these, water jets. And I was so I was consumed with this idea of the printer defining a large array of objects, and then that defined this piece of work, which is a machine that can make any lens programmatically. So it's like a printer. So normally there's about 1,200 different prescriptions that define the range of human error if you only look at first and second order. So this machine can do any of those lenses. Literally, the shape of this ring here defines the boundary condition that determines whether the lens is going to be spherical or have a cylindrical component. So those of you with astigmatism, raise your hand. That means you're more messed up in one axis than the other. And so literally change the ratio of the 2 chords of the ellipse define the ratio of your astigmatism. So with that boundary condition as input and then controlling the pressure of the membrane, you can now define all of those 1,200 lenses in a single machine, meaning you don't have to keep an enormous inventory of lenses in the back of your shop. You literally just take a prescription, take it to your 3D eyeglass printer, program it, and print it. So you can see here, I'm taking the pressure out of that, takes the slack out, and as soon as you get to a certain point, now you'll see that mirrored surface act as a mirrored lens. Conveniently, I have an eye chart in the background, so you can see as the pressure changes, you'll be able to see the eye chart come in and out of focus. Right. I sort of recoil at hearing my own voiceover on this video, so I'm just going to talk over that. This is a calibration device that now looks at that membrane. So literally this is a pinhole up here, this is just like a calibration slide, and then you look at that mirrored surface. That's why it is mirrored. When you're looking through the pinhole without the video camera obviously can't do it. What that means is both the calibration slide and the reflection are both in focus in the same plane, and it's like an optical vernier caliper. So to define the prescription, you read off what's on the slide plus the reflected image, and you have a very fine control by watching how those tick marks line up, sort of just literally using the differential vernier principle. You can see it just there for a second at both of them in focus. You can, that guarantees that you're getting the lens that you want. Unfortunately, I haven't figured out using this awful Macintosh system how to control my QuickTime movies within the show, so you're going to have to watch the whole lot. This is just showing that you can also do the last surface you looked at was concave. This is the convex surface. So in the new prototype machines, we actually control both surfaces, which actually gives you more degrees of freedom than the existing eyeglass manufacturing thing. So you can more highly optimize both surfaces for an individual's prescription and aesthetic requirements. All right, so once you've defined the two surfaces, and you can just look at this as the physics of the universe does all the computation of your surfaces for you. We now use a UV light. That UV light will cure the polymer in about 3 minutes. This is pretty impressive. It's 10 watts of UV LEDs for about $60, which is pretty nice. Gets rid of all the AC power requirements. This is next year's Christian Dior eyeglass frame shape. At least that's what we're simulating with this rubber band. You'll realize what that's for in a second. This is acrylic, or CR39 is the trade name for this monomer. Anyone who's wearing eyeglasses in this room, this is what your glasses are made out of. The design constraint was to not provide another type.
Is the polymer dimensionally stable, liquid to solid?
You lose about depending on who makes it, 0.5 to 1%. The nice thing is that that is a big issue if you're using rigid molds, but this mold, because it has a little bit of compliance, will actually follow the shrinking of the polymer, of the monomer, on polymerization, so you get, it gives you slightly higher quality than two rigid surfaces. Exactly the same. This particular one is 1.56, which is sort of a mid to high refractive index. And literally, this is exactly the monomer you have in all of your lenses here. So once you've finished, you reverse the pressure. It pops that lens off the surface. Now you literally pop out the eyeglass, which is of your interest, which is in the center of that rubber band. You can see the camera struggles with the autofocus, but that's about a -2 lens with about a half diopter of astigmatic power. The idea being you now pop that out, and literally you have a pre-made set of frames. You jam that in the frames, and you've got a pair of eyeglasses. And you can see if I rotate this, the mild astigmatism as you distort that image. So that's starting to think about, there's this enormous effort to move towards CNC-controlled digitizing of, in terms of manufacturing. I'm kind of interested in this, and other systems like this where you sort of have, you're finding the analog solution for what you want to make, and you define the boundary conditions, everything to make that analog solution.
Say 2 sentences about how glasses are produced commercially today.
Oh, so commercially today, for those 1,200 different prescriptions there are, they will have 1,200 or a slightly smaller subset of rear surfaces. It'll be a glass mold, and that glass mold it has to be polished and it's very expensive. And then they have to have 1,200 front surface molds. So you can imagine that's a very large library of molds. You literally put those surfaces in close contact. You inject the same monomer you saw here. You use the same UV process. So what you eliminate in this procedure is the 1,200 mold surface library. Each one of those molds costs between $100 and a few $1,000s, depending on which curve it is. So you can imagine the combinatorics goes high. Now, if you want to add another degree of freedom, so there's enough people in this audience who are presbyopic, so that means at a certain age you lose the accommodative facility in your eye lenses, so you need progressive lenses, bifocals. If you add that, the array of lens molds you need goes essentially infinite, right? So it's 1,200 by n, where n is the number of different progressive lens or bifocal designs you want. So in that case, we're actually finding as a company that that's an interesting thing to go after, is we're adding more degrees of freedom to that membrane, so we control the stiffness of the membrane locally. So imagine a balloon dog where you weaken a little select section of the balloon and a little bubble forms. So we're now digitally controlling that membrane to programmatically pop out bubbles. Now that's great at computing spline surfaces, although mathematically it's tough because everything is extremely coupled in that system. So we're sort of grappling with evolving the algorithms to define it. But that may be an interesting thing to think about in terms of a programmatic injection mold. It's probably only going to do curved surfaces, very hard to do discontinuities. But if you wanted to mold every doll's face differently in a production line of dolls, then literally digitally controlling the mold surface so every doll comes out differently might be interesting. So we're thinking about applications like that beyond eyeglasses. All right, so those are two pieces of work. I'm going to switch now to something I'm really doing a lot of work on right now, thinking about, because of these computer-controlled machines, it's possible to pass physical descriptions of mechanical things around digitally pretty well. So I'm thinking a lot about that and how it might enable open source hardware. And I always return to this guy. Anyone who hasn't read As We May Think by Vannevar Bush should. So post-World War II, Vannevar Bush comes back and says, we've just released the horrors of atomic energy on mankind. All of these great brains were coming back from the Manhattan Project. What are we going to do with all these people? And he describes in this article his idea. He basically writes verbatim here what the internet should look like. And it's really worth reading. The nicest piece is he describes it from a researcher's point of view. So he's like, while I'm researching at my lab bench, I should have all of these devices that automatically annotate everything that I do. So they record the pressure of this or that or that, and sort of auto-annotates everything he does, so there'd be a much richer sharing of information between researchers. So the web, he describes the web in the architecture to support this, but the web hasn't got there in terms of the auto-documentation, etc., hasn't quite worked. So I was thinking about that in 2000, I guess, when I started a project at MIT with a bunch of other students called ThinkCycle. The other influence on that project was the SETI project. So SETI was looking at everyone's screensavers as a supercomputer to find alien life. We wanted to think about all of the idle hours of engineers sitting in Microsoft trying to procrastinate, as well as all of the idle hours of design students at mechanical engineering schools as a supercomputer for solving design problems. So we built ThinkCycle as this sort of dating service and documentation service for all of those engineers to iteratively contribute to, and at the time we were focusing on developmental engineering problems. So a couple of neat things came out of that. This one ended up being a bunch of Stanford students and a bunch of MIT students. The one on that one there, this is... So premature babies, about 1 million babies die globally each year because they're born in hospitals without a premature baby incubator, which is about a $25,000 to $100,000 machine that essentially just regulates humidity and temperature. And so actually a quantum theorist at MIT and a guy who builds space telescopes at Stanford realized that this is just a pretty simple thermodynamic problem. So they made a little pillow of paraffin wax, and you heat the paraffin wax up. As it goes through a phase change, it goes through an isotherm. They could tailor that isotherm at 37.2 degrees, which is the right temperature for the baby. It would hold that isotherm for 8 hours. They then built this little tent over the top. They designed that tent fairly accurately to control the humidity. And so literally for about $15 in parts, they functionally got 99% of the way to one of these incubators. And then that is now being used to sort of, if you're in a rural hospital in Kenya, for example, that can't afford this incubator, they're looking at using these devices. This was a cholera, another example. One of the problems in cholera treatment is you just want to use a very fast IV drip. But there's not really enough time to calibrate each IV drip to every individual. So what they thought about ways that you could calibrate these things much faster. Literally in the old design, it's very hard to see here, but in the old designs of these clamps, this runway was linear, so as you wind this gear up and down there, you're pinching a tube, so you're constricting the flow. But because that was linear, it has a nonlinear relationship to the flow, and in fact, the first inch and a half that you might roll this roller down here, you have no real control over the flow. And in the last millimeter, it goes from like killing an infant to starving a full adult in terms of the control. So literally, this project, someone just inverted the calculation and then designed the function that surface should be, so you get linear control over the entire length range. And so now, you can just basically put a sticker, infant, 6-year-old, 20-year-old, etc. So that's just to say that, opening these projects up to a lot of brains meant we got access to a bunch of different solutions. It was pretty interesting. We started to see a lot of people submitting notes. In this case, this is for a wind-up power device. Someone did the physics on a precessing. This is a hand power generator. So there was a lot of neat things going on. So this spurred me as an individual to think about, I was doing a lot of kite design at the time. I wanted to do a further experiment in a very focused, how do you get a lot of people to design this thing here, which is a kite surfing kite. So I started Zero Prestige. I posted some designs. I posted a how to sew your own kite surfing kite. This was in 1999, before it was really an industry. And so my first set of sewing instructions looked like this. Within 2 years, I'd say 400 people from Siberia to India to Australia to South Africa had built these, generally people in locations where the industry wasn't supplying already. A guy in Australia wrote an open source piece of software called SurfPlan to enable people to design this. More accurately, this really boosted the community. I would get sent amazing photographs like this from, this was a guy, I think it was, this guy lives in the Gorge, so a couple of hours south of here. He made one out of Tyvek because the sailcloth was too expensive. Tyvek worked great. I don't know why he tie-dyed it, though. It was interesting in that the computational fluid dynamics was done by a guy who worked at the French Space Agency. He had spare lunchtime cycles, interested in this stuff. So we got optimized foil sections done on the best things in the world. There were people, actually this was interesting, there was one guy in the community who had a tablet PC, and he did the most annotation of, like, is this stitch really the right stitch to use? And he did all of these post-annotated sort of images. And it was pretty interesting to watch that community. I was using a blog for Zero Prestige. There was a Yahoo group that we also started for more of the conversational side. There were lots of members. I think you see 616 members in Inflato design. This is literally people who were interested in designing and furthering this art. So that was really successful. Lots of people hacking, and you can see a huge number of the little innovations that by themselves weren't economic for anyone to commercialize, but you can see all of those innovations heavily influencing what's now a very commercial industry. So all the advances in safety in kite surfing came from this group. So this is to say, at the bleeding edge of irrationally passionate amateurs is done a really lot of interesting hardware hacking. So right now, I should cross out the CO and replace it with Instructables. We're trying to scale this experience to all hobbyists across all forms in terms of providing an open source development community for people who develop all sorts of hardware. Now the key insight that we're sort of banking on that I think is interesting is humans build things in linear time. And because you build things in linear time, that means that nearly everything is a stepwise procedure. Now, if you've got large design teams, you've got a whole lot of individuals working in parallel linear time, but you can sort of branch and then collapse those branches. So we're sort of building a system. Think of it as a cross between Wikipedia and Blogger. Blogger analogy meaning lower the threshold for people to iteratively improve things, and that, all of that is just taking lessons from the zero prestige and think cycle experiences. And Wikipedia in terms of having, user community generated content. I like using this one. People are familiar with this guy and this guy, but what we really want to do is this guy, right? So, DXF files, STL files. There's a huge number of ways of physically describing stuff, but that describes the 3D thing you might build, but there's actually all the little steps, like how do you drill the particular hole that fastens it, that get missed in those purely digital descriptions. So we're also trying to figure out how to tag and augment all the data with those sorts of things. So this is the sort of the sequencing thing is, this is how everyone builds stuff. But the neat thing is, if you look at the way people document what they do on the web, everyone ends up having to re-document the wheel. So we're now looking at, because everything is sort of sequential, this might be how you drill a hole in an aluminum set of steps. So now when I say this is how I built my XYZ, I can just call upon someone else's subroutine. So look at hacking the physical universe as a whole lot of subroutines. So now you really only have to document the unique components of your individual project. And then you can branch, and I could talk more about that, but only if people are interested. So what are people out there building? Everything from, this is a ramjet engine made from 2 stainless steel coffee mugs. I encourage everyone to Google that and take a look. And this is a guy who documents how to build a Tron outfit. This is one of the more palatable images. And I just sort of say this as, I think ThinkCycle was a little too earnest. In ThinkCycle was aiming at, let's solve the world's problems using these communities. I think this is more where it's got to go. It's just let everyone document the how I built my Halloween costume type stuff. But I bet you'll see what froths up and filters through the top is a lot of interesting ideas. Sorry, in the back.
This looks like what the patent office should be. Any relation to what the patent office is would be purely fortuitous.
Yes, this is what the patent office should look like. Yeah, I agree. The long-term goal is part of that to return to the Memex guy and Vannevar Bush and the Memex is this was always my nemesis in any academic paper, the materials and methods section. So nominally, the materials and methods section should allow anyone to repeat the experiment and get the same results as the person. Now, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I'm definitely not stupid, and I've tried to repeat probably a few dozen people's methods and materials in my life. You can never do it, because they don't tell you between, we bought this, if you don't get the Sigma Aldrich ethanol, it won't work, because the impurity is in the ethanol from the other company. That was the secret sauce. So the secret sauce always is missing here. So we're actually talking with a couple of journals, including the Public Library of Science, which is sort of a new open source model to publishing, about how do we start to encourage the methods section to be documented with this instructables thing. So literally, you can look at all of the subroutines. So this is probably going to have the biggest effect in the biological sciences, where you can think about all of the different little routines you have to do to clean your DNA, etc., as little subroutines. But maybe this is an interesting place to go. We're going to start with hobbyists because their threshold is low, and then work our way up to that. Ultimately, this is where I want to see it go. This is from Make Magazine. I write articles for them on the side. So there's 2 million people, I think, who are documented as people who hack their cars on weekend in this country, right? That, to me, that looks like an awesome developer community for an open source hybrid electric car, right? Why have these people fixing their 1950s carburetors when they could be figuring out how to do it? If you look at the Volkswagen, 50 million Volkswagens were made. At this stage, Volkswagen looks like an open source car because the number of people who've hacked and retrofitted and built dune buggies, etc. But why not, if you had the tools to start documenting it, why not just throw upon that community the challenge to beat GM at the hybrid game? And I suspect that's the super ambitious goal. All of these slides have real meaning, but I can't remember what they are. This is, the first example of the commercialization of this stuff is Cafepress. I don't know who's looked at this. It's really puerile, but they're doing extremely well. This is where you design your own t-shirt logo, you design your own coffee cup logos. You can build a virtual store at Cafepress, and so Dan can log on to my virtual store at Cafepress and buy a Zero Prestige hat. Or a squid, your own squid t-shirt. But I'm interested in the stage where I can log on and buy Dan's hybrid electric bicycle or XYZ. And that's I think that's sort of an interesting thing. This is where you buy your parts. This is where you sell and buy more parts. Okay, so to switch again, we can come back to various things. I'm now going to show a couple of random projects and maybe some how-toons. This is something else we do in Squid Labs. This is this stemmed from our parachute guidance work, but this is a tablet PC. Most of you recognize it. We've retrofitted it with inertial sensing, GPS, and a very simple web camera on the backside. So whatever you point it at, it shows you. It's semi-invisible in that it shows you the world beyond it. But we then superimpose on that 3D data sets. The data set for this demo we use is all of the cities of the world and all of the stars in the galaxy. So you can point this thing anywhere and you can see that's Boston, that's Paris, that's Rome, that's Athens. So literally as you point at the floor, that's where it is. I think we go up and find the North Star in this video. Very primitive interface, but you get the idea. There's Draco star. I'm not sure whether I should show the rest of this video. It has Tim O'Reilly when he finds Mecca. I'll let you. Here it is. Very politically correct. So that's sort of a neat thing we're also working on. This is another one. This is an electronic rope product. Again, this is sort of thinking about information and structure. This is a normal braided rope, except that we've replaced some of the fibers with conducting fibers. And so what's happening here is the old Chinese finger torture principle. Everyone remember that trick? You pull a braid and it tightens as you put the tension on. So literally we're exploiting that in this rope so that when you pull the rope, you're putting radial compression on the fibers, and that radial compression then modulates the capacitance and the resistance. And so this is a strain gauge. Now we can do some neat things. So you can see as I put tension on this, the number of LEDs raises. So this is a very coarse display of the tension in that rope. Sort of almost no incremental cost to the actual material, except for the circuit board to drive it. But we're looking at that. We've built a musical instrument. This was for the Cooper Hewitt. So this is a 10-foot high tensegrity harp where every one of these ropes is this material. Everything you play on it sounds like Brian Eno, which is the safest mapping of music if you're going to put something in a museum. It can't sound bad if it sounds like Brian Eno. You can see the response of each of the fibers coming up on the display there. And yes, the museum space was too noisy to get a clean sound feed, so that the sound feed was taken in an empty museum, the video was taken in a full museum. So it doesn't quite map if you're looking for that. So maybe I'll finish with some how-toons, and then we'll open questions on anything, and I can go to support slides. So back to teaching kids how to build things. I think I want open source hardware to be something that exists 20 years from now, and I think you need to sort of also there's an educational component to that. So most kids buy a lot of their toys, but if you want them to be hacking their toys, you sort of got to encourage it. So how-toons is sort of my subversive educational component to making open source hardware pretty popular. This is one of my collaborators, Joost Bonson. Here we're shooting rings of smoke at the Ig Nobel Awards at Harvard University. That's the illustrator Nick. The reason I bring up Nick is because I draw like this. Nick draws like this. Big difference. And then that's a sort of finished how-toon. This particular one, I'm flying through these. You can have a look on the website, howtoons.org, to see these. This is the actual project there. I'll let this one play. It's very simple materials. We try to keep the cost of materials for any project but below $1 or $2 if we're feeling generous. So this is a couple of rubber bands and a normal washer. I don't know if anyone wants to hazard a guess at what this will do in advance. Okay, so it's wound up again. So there you go. So, open source whoopee cushion. That's my fart gag. That's just to wake you all up. Kids, you might think, oh, that's pretty puerile, but I love that point. Kids will want to build this thing because of the result. And in the process, they'll learn the manual dexterity of having to bend things with pliers, and they'll develop a physical intuition for the universe. Now, I don't expect them to think about the differential equations of the energy in the rubber band or the strain in the bends now, but when they get to college or high school, if they've developed this intuition at age 7 by hacking stuff, I think that makes an easier job for teaching physics later. Some other neat, I'll just run through a few of these because they're kind of fun and I've got some time. This is a Vortex Cannon. I think there's now a commercial product similar to this. This is our test subjects. One of them was having a birthday, so he's shooting the candles out using a Vortex Cannon. So you can see he blew the candles out. Action at a distance for kids is everything. If you can do something from 20 feet away, that's always a guaranteed winner. Note here, the interfering adult. As soon as the interfering adult comes, the kid couldn't shoot the candles at all. But without the adult, the kid's doing great. Yeah. So we realize that visualization is pretty important for kids. So we're like, oh, how can we help them see what actually happens with that cannon? So this is the dry ice and boiling water version. You can see those lovely rings. But no kid's really going to have access to dry ice. So we realized that, okay, we'll just run this through Reynolds numbers, reduce the scale so it all works in water. This is literally a film canister with food colouring in it and a piece of Glad wrap. I might run that again because I really watch this one on the right. So literally, or a plastic cup, food colouring, Glad wrap or a cling wrap on top, and a little hole in the front. And you can see these beautifully shaped rings. I think the reason I like this is because 6 years at MIT, and this is the first application of Reynolds numbers that worked, and was kind of intuitive.
You could do just smoke, but nowadays you don't encourage kids to be involved with smoke.
Yeah, no, you can do it with the top of a cigarette packet. Yeah, you can't really teach that to 8-year-olds. So we do things like electric motors, musical. This is a flute made out of a turkey baster. A very primitive pair of underwater goggles. Basically just gets rid of the surface roughness by using a plastic soda bottle with a hole cut in it. How to count with binary. This is kind of a neat one. So, you can use your fingers as the binary digits. My favorite is 132. Now I can tell everyone I flipped all of Microsoft off. This is, how to build a bottle rocket. And so when we started to do things like the bottle rocket, this is like issues of safety. Everyone's like, oh, safety, this is terrible. Anyway, before I get to the safety point, see if you can pick which 2 girls built that rocket. Yeah. So that's, future NASA engineers right there. So everyone's like, this is terrible, safety issues, right? You're encouraging 8-year-olds to build bottle rockets and stuff. And this unfortunately is not a satisfactory answer to them, but this is the answer I want to give. This is from a fabulous book called Handicraft for Handy Boys, written in 1910. The Wright brothers have just learnt to fly. Every boy wants to learn to fly. So they encourage you and they give you the plans, find your birch and everything. build this glider. Okay, so far so good. The interaction here is what I love. Okay, so now once you've built your glider, walk to the edge of a cliff. Make what you don't see here, make sure there is a steam train coming along the tracks beneath the cliff, and then they show you the successful and the unsuccessful flight trajectories, one of which you land headfirst into a barn. So I'm like, compared to that, we're golden. Liability, not a problem. This is a project that is interesting in a sense, and I'll tell you why shortly. This is a Marshmallow Cannon, so it's essentially a blow dart. Uses Bernoulli's theorem to send the blow dart through some curves, which is kind of mysterious. And so there's my drawing, first draft. This is it. This is the sort of way that we embed the blueprint for any project within the actual storyline. This was my childhood experience. Innocent me, sister comes along, tortures me, pelts me with stuff. I go to the drawing board, try and fix things so I can get her back. By the time I come back to get her, she's outsmarted me again. War of attrition. Anyone with an older sister recognizes this. So we had to come up with a safety thing for eyeballs. So this is, that's the slow-mo version. This is literally taking a soda bottle. You can pressurize these things to 180 psi safely, so they're pretty resilient. And you can see we're shooting my colleague at Squid Labs, Dan, point blank with marshmallows.
What do we call this? We can't just call it a safety glass. We have to call it that.
So that ended up being the safety glass cartoon. This is sort of the point I want. This is and you can see the cartoon often gets illustrated by our kids because Sammy, our test subject here, he was dying to draw on his mask, and you can see how that ended up in our final cartoon. But this came out about 2 weeks ago. I was pretty interested. I'll have to read it because I'm not sure that you'll be able to get it from there. Teen forced to close fair booth. So this is an article about a high school kid who found the design online for a marshmallow shooting gun, and you look at it, it's the same as you'll see on the website. And we have a Creative Commons license, so it explicitly states he can't go and profit from this. But that's not actually what's in the article. Conveniently, the high school kid's name is Busted. I think he's Ben Busted. So the little bastard made all these marshmallow shooters, went to the state fair and was selling them, thinking everything was fine. But I don't know whether I should be scared of this or what, but the local council came and said, you need $1 million worth of liability insurance to sell these things. And they said, and it cost $5,000 for $1 million worth of liability insurance, so it sent him broke. So we didn't have to prosecute him on the Creative Commons license because someone else did it on liability, but now I'm like, wait a second, I haven't got my liability insurance for cartoons yet. Anyway, so... yeah, maybe I will show this. So this is one that won't make cartoons. See if you can find the instability in this experiment. Yeah, gets me every time. For those who are concerned, we had a filter on the intake, so I wasn't blowing stuff in my face. That one won't make the how-toons list. Anyway, so we're actually going to have some books of this come out next year, and this is one of the stories from the books. They're going to be expanded a little, and in this one, they actually teach you how to make ice cream with 2 plastic bags, rock salt, and ice. It's kind of a nice story. I might finish there. We can go back to revisit any topic if people have questions on individual things, or just open questions generally. I know that was too much at once.
You're looking at softer polymers for real-time focusing for lenses?
I'm interested in it. And we are looking at using a very similar technique to do real-time focusing for consumer applications. So you can guess in less than 2 guesses what people would want that for, especially if it was about that big. So yeah, we're looking at that. And the nice thing, actually, we're probably going to be the first group that actually show. you don't, everyone's mathematical model in this minimum energy surface-defined lenses to date has been these things produce a perfect sphere. I'll tell you straight out, that's not true. You can imagine how the boundary conditions create some constraints. So we actually have that first data. What the interesting thing is it looks like the universe, again, works in your favor, and you get the asphericity you want due to the boundary conditions, if that makes sense. So you can get rid of chromatic errors by the asphericity.
So many different ways that you can create different boundary conditions. So
and you can, you can go to town. And this is what that's something I'm really interested in is how do you find analog computational solutions that the physical universe finds you?
If you take this eyeglass making machine to a third world country, you have a cheap way to get the prescription, to measure how badly, what lenses people need.
Yeah, I didn't put that up here. We are actually working on a National Institute of Health SBIR grant to do exactly that. So the question is, this machine was designed principally to go out to rural communities, developing countries to make the eyeglasses, but you also need to take the prescription. Existing technology to take the prescription uses Shack-Hartman wavefront analysis to find the complete 3D topology of your lens, which is way overkill because the lens is only correct to second order, so why measure to sixth order the deviations in the eye? And that device consequently costs between $6,000 and $30,000, is hugely fragile, and has some other problems such as to use that machine you have to look at a virtual image. Now, to prescribe for the eye alone is actually a little bit of a misnomer because it's a coupled brain-eye system. And so when you use this testing device, your brain says, I know the image, it looks like it's at optical infinity, but I know the image is being generated 6 inches away from me. And depending on the patient, that competition can lead to errors in the measurement. So we're actually developing a different system. So imagine, and this will sort of relate to your previous question, not exactly, but close. We're developing a pair of swimming goggles, an adaptive lens, and literally we just do a differential measurement. So we, 6 LEDs, look at the combination refractive status of that lens and your eye. You can tell whether you have to go north or south, i.e. more or less. You do that, you iterate. Because you're using a real lens, you're looking at the real world. There's not the competition between the brain and the eye. So we actually are working on that. And then you just literally use one of these adjustable lenses to be the feedback in that system.
Were you a Lego kid or a Meccano kid?
I got an Australian accent, so I was both. But Meccano I loved. I think they call it something else here, right?
I don't know. I know it as Meccano as well.
A rector set. Yeah, in America it's a rector set. I actually just wrote an article, my last article for Make Magazine. They wanted an article on kits. And they said, what kits did you use as a kid? And I'm like, well, Lego is Turing equivalent engineering, right? You can build anything. And I loved it. But I also flirted with Meccano because it gave you the impression you could do a whole lot more. Ultimately, though, I think Lego is Turing equivalent and Meccano is a poor emulator. You can build more rigid things, but you can't build everything. So that's kind of my answer to that. I actually also ended up being the Lego fellow at MIT, which was interesting. I understand Microsoft has tried to work with Lego. I don't know how your experience was. They're kind of an interesting company. They have family values. Most companies have family values. They have family values, capital F, capital V. And I was working with them about 6 months after they had released the still frame animation product. I don't know if anyone remembers this, but they'd sell you a still frame animation camera, so you build your little Lego diorama, you have all of your characters interact, you make a movie of it. One of the first high-profile uses of this was a gay couple in San Francisco who made a gay sort of semi-pornographic sitcom using Lego characters. Lego, seriously, it went to the highest, except that it was their highest profit product that year. The descendant of Mr. Lego was like, we have to pull this product. This is outside of family values. I was slightly unaware of that when I was trying to convince them. I had just built a 3D printer out of Lego that used chocolate as the printing medium. So, $100 worth of Lego, and you could have a desktop 3D printer. You can do, it's amazing. Using their racks and pinions, I was getting 1mm resolution, which is fine if you just want to build, something small. I'm like, this is, it's a no-brainer. Please make this product. I want every kid to like take a 3D model of Barbie and a 3D model of Ken and like cut them in half and meld them together and make a transgender Barbie. It'll be awesome. And okay, so how not to pitch to Lego? Right there, yeah. I still wish someone would make that product for kids, like the really, really cheap desktop 3D printer. Hewlett-Packard doesn't want to seem to come to the party, don't know why. I think it's an untested market. And yeah, I'm not quite sure why that hasn't happened. It is a patent nightmare, the 3D printing space. That could also be it. Everyone owns everything, so. Yep.
It's a great idea that you're encouraging kids to hack and build things. Have you talked to schools, and do you have any idea how other people in the current education system would deal with this kind of encouragement?
So it's interesting. Right now, it's really just run as a blog. All that will change in the next 12 months because we've now signed with HarperCollins, a publishing house. So all of our open source pretense will be filtered through highly commercial publishing henceforth. But watching it progress as a blog, we made that compromise consciously because, in fact, if you watch it working as a blog, incredibly popular with homeschoolers, right? But in reality, homeschoolers don't need this encouragement and this help. They've already got parents who understand, who are going to go and do it all with them. So how do you reach everyone else? And blogs really just get the 1% digitally enabled elite. So books and a big advertising campaign will hopefully get that there a little further. The other main set of, to answer your question, the other main set of users we'd get would be science teachers, and I probably get 2 or 3 emails a week, which is I'm a science teacher in XYZ, or a math teacher, or even an English teacher. I would like to use your project for this class. Either can you clarify this, or in some cases, and this is great, and this is where the community thing comes in, there's a lot of very anxious science teachers out there who are like, oh, can we do this project? I'd love this to be illustrated in how-toons. And so I get a nice mixture of questions and suggestions. The amazing thing is, I'm reasonably good at copy editing, but my spell and grammar checks miss a lot. It's unbelievable. Within 24 hours of posting a new how-toon, I have hundreds of letters from English teachers who are like, I love what you're doing with this project, but you must teach proper grammar and you must teach proper English, and you've spelt this wrong, and it's amazing. The group edit is extremely powerful. But yeah, so there is a lot of use at a low level. We're starting to get interest from people like Edutopia. That's George Lucas's educational foundation. Essentially, there's, My Perfect World, I would have been, because it actually costs a lot of money to pay an illustrator to draw things really well. So we're kind of fund limited in how fast we can draw. So I always thought, it'll be a no-brainer for education systems to come to town and help us build this curriculum, this sort of underground curriculum. But the public education system is so strapped for money. That was really a pipe dream. So it's tough, but I'm trying to find, almost by whatever means possible, build this public library of teacher aids, and then just let them use them as they are now. Download it off the web, work with the class, or buy the books eventually, do it with the class. Yeah.
If you're gainfully employed, how do you keep your gain larger than 1? Seems like you're doing a lot of great things in the public domain.
Right. So, well, a lot of them are compromises. So, and you have to do this to be gainfully employed. You have to sign with a large publishing house and get an advance to write books. You have to work with the National Institute of Health to progress the eyeglass project. The eyeglass project is particularly interesting on that realm. I really thought, when you're at MIT and someone magically pays your electricity bill, you can live like an animal and live extremely well, right? I was living on $4,000 a year probably after all the stuff, but just living like a king because MIT's dumpsters are rich. When you leave, it's a different story. But at the time, eyeglasses, we'll just go and solve this problem, make this great thing. to find anyone here knows the cost between that lab bench prototype you've seen there and delivered product. That's not an insignificant sum. To be honest, using social venture capital to find the money to make that project happen, fairly tough because it needs a large amount of upfront capital. Social venture capital is very risk averse. They really want a finished solution. So in effect, we are now keeping that project alive by doing this NIH work. So the low-cost prescription device that I described, not only will it be very good in developing countries, but we pitched that to the National Institute of Health here as an extremely low-cost screening device, because you're not allowed to prescribe without an optometrist in this country, so that the design goal for that product was already discounted because we are designing to not need an optometrist. But however, in hospitals or in schools, you could use it as an excellent screening and additive prescription device. Is the kid in the front row ADD, or is it the fact they don't have the right prescription? If you can make a $150 eye testing device, most high schools can afford that. You could similarly use it for a lot of early detection of other things like diabetes in other places.
If you have something that could fly in the developing countries, you may want to talk to the Gates Foundation, because that's their business.
Yeah, the Gates. I would say in social philanthropy, the Gates Foundation is. I don't say this because I'm standing here. I think they invest very well compared to most social. I can give you an hour-long diatribe of the problems with the social philanthropy industry. I think the Gates Foundation is doing the best job, and that's partly because they won't speak to me or the 100 other me's who are competing, because they're like, that's not our core focus and our goal. So they're doing an excellent job. I'm not sure that I want to take money away from AIDS projects to do this. It's important. I mean, you can't read the anti-AIDS literature if you don't have eyeglasses, but still, hard. So, it's a.
You may get a no from them. They send a lot of no's.
These rights, they don't typically fund things like that.
Why not? If it's developed.
My brother is
developing
developing things like that. It's hard, really hard to.
Yeah, it's an unusual model because essentially what we're also trying to do here, it's a cross between aid of shipping of something and micro-entrepreneurialism like the Grameen Bank thing. Because I don't want to be the person who has to go to every village and run that machine. So we want to develop this to a product that I can ship it to a local entrepreneur. They pay, it's going to cost for the prescription device and that. If we ever got to a scale of 10,000 units of each, we could probably package both for somewhere between 2 and 5K in just the hardware.
Okay.
You'd like to be able to ship that to someone. You can do the economics, and if we did a lot of the economics in Nicaragua or Mexico, a micro-entrepreneur who bought those two for $2 to $5 grand, they could pay back, living in a 20,000 person community, they could pay back that expense in under 2 years. So it's not a terrible option at that stage. But it makes it an unusual venture because people are like, wait, is this for profit? Is this not for profit? You're trying to sell the machines. And I'm like, well, it takes engineering dollars to build the fucking machines. So you got to do it that way. Anyway, lots of passion could come out if we talk about that one a lot. I can show other funny videos if people want that in the last few minutes. So we also have zoetropes. This one's kind of nice. So that's just a CD. You can see the little character running there. This one is a hovercraft, so you turn your vacuum cleaner upside down. Duct tape and a piece of wood. So this is the one that really breaks our $2 budget. But if you can convince your mother to run her vacuum cleaner backwards, you can build that one. Yeah, the CD and balloons, but yeah, we also have the CD balloons. But I'm interested in that scale thing. So we also have the CD and balloon one, but I want to show kids how you can scale stuff up. This is the flute. The noise has stopped. I guess they turned audio off. This is one of my favorites. This is the Hulk taking a whiz. This is kind of neat. You just fill a soda bottle with a few drops of milk, so you get enough diffractive surfaces. You put a laser in one side. You have a little 1/4-inch hole in the other side, and it makes this nice light pipe. So we're using that one in combination with the binary counting one to sort of show, this is data over a channel. You can actually build a little chopper, and this is your first optical fiber, right? It's actually really nice. You can see the Rayleigh instability really pronounced where it breaks up. So this is the hovercraft again at the Ig Nobel Awards. The interesting anecdotes, so I like to run these parties with kids where we build a few of the existing how-toons, and then you say to the kids, what do you want to build? This girl was like, I want to walk like a robot. And it was really tough to figure out how to walk like a robot. But eventually she realized if you just like bent a piece of metal and put a couple of PVC tubes taped to your feet, it constrains you to walk like a robot. And if you think about the early mechanical robot toys of the 60s, this is how exactly how their mechanism was. She's really bright. We do things like puppets, stomp rockets with apple juice containers, duct tape things, all sorts of nice stuff. This is a minimum energy surface lens as a microscope. You'll probably appreciate this, Mike. So we wanted to have a system where you could focus very accurately, because the point of focus in these things, you've got very narrow bandwidth because you've got a 3mm focal length spherical lens. Essentially, this is just a paper clip with a drop of water. So literally, if you use the screw cap on top of a soda bottle as your stage, you get the nice amplification of screw motion to linear to height to give very accurate focusing for this thing. That was kind of cute. That's most of the slides. The other interesting thing at these parties, so you always at the end you say to the kids, okay, if you could build anything, what do you want to build? And then I challenge them, I'll be able to help you figure out how to build whatever you want. And so it's a no-brainer with the boys because it's always, I want to build a flying skateboard, right? Everything they want is a permutation on flying and skateboard, or it's always something like that. And you're like, oh, okay, we could do magnetic levitation, or we could use the boundary layer effect, or whatever. The really interesting, I sort of speak of these sex issues because someone will usually ask this question. With the girls, it's kind of fascinating. They always say, I want to build a machine that will help me read the dreams of my friends. This shows you how much more advanced and intelligent girls are than boys at age 10. And you're like, oh my God, they've stumped me. This is really hard. I now have to figure out how to tell them how to make a machine that can read the dreams of their friends. So I then give them this terribly spurious talk about, well, you can attach very narrow electrodes to single neurons, and you can watch the neurons fire. And there was this experiment at Harvard where they took the visual cortex of a cat and they put an array of electrodes in it, and they played black and white John Weston movies to the cat, and they could see the shadows of the horses in the visual cortex, which is amazing in itself considering the distance between the visual system and the visual cortex. And so you say so you leave it as an open question. So you say, yes, and so this is why you need to become a neuroscientist, girls, because we're so far away from doing what you want to do. But I think that potentially that's something where they'd go. But it really is pronounced how most of the girls want this. Really, they want to increase the ways they can interact with their friends, and boys just want to get hurt. So unless there's any more questions, I'll probably wrap up about there because I get a little coarse.
Thanks very much for your time.
Sure.